Nepal, Patikrit Pine. As we speak about Iran, we are showing those visuals of what happened in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh as well. Economic distress. People can withstand a lot of things. We've seen that in the course of history. But clearly, one thing that really is the last straw on the camel's back, as it were, is economic distress, and that is what is what is playing out in Iran. Not the first time we've seen protests in Iran, but this could yet turn out to be definitive.
Well, at least in case of Bangladesh, there was no economic distress. A lot of what happened in Bangladesh was orchestrated because the organization, the party which spearheaded the entire protest is expected to be wiped out in the forthcoming election in Bangladesh. That is the NCP, the National Citizens Party. Secondly, if you look at what happens in Iraq, look, a lot of what is happening has to do with the economic sanctions. And it is as clear as this, that if you do not allow American companies or Western companies to operate in your country, you would be considered as a pariah, you would be considered a lot of things, and you will be considered as an adversary, and there will be sanctions. So there has been sanctions on Iran for 40, 45 years, as recent as the CAATSA, the Countering American Adversaries to Sanctions Act, and a series of other sanctions, which have literally crippled their economy because you, in spite of having one of the largest reserves of oil, cannot simply trade it. And because dollar is the reserve and the trading currency of the world, it is easy for the Americans to impose sanctions. It's a little laughable when America shows concern for the protesters of Iran because we know what generally they do in many of the countries. But the reality is this, is sanction the only reason why Iran is in such a difficult situation? I guess not. Because one of the key reasons for Iran's problem is because Iran has overstretched itself. Iran for a long period of time had taken their own people for granted. They were heavily investing into Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis. Their concern were not for the people of the country itself. That's one part. Secondly, you might say that Americans can be responsible for this or that, but certainly the Americans are not responsible for the way the Iranians treat their own women. So there are a combination of various factors. Third, there's a huge level of inequality. The average, lifestyle, cost of living, standard of living in Iran is very different from what you get if you're part of the clergy, if you're part of the regime. So there's a difference. Now, ideology, nationalism, all these things are fine, but so long as the stomachs are filled with food. Now, that is where a problem is emerging, because the alternate structure which Iran thought would work in terms of China investing $400–500 billion, trading in yuan, that has not happened. Last but not the least, Iran has created far too many number of enemies. They have a problem with the West. They have a ideological hatred. They want to destroy Israel. That's another part. And at the same time, they have terribly bad relation with the Arab Sunni world. They have completely difficult relation with the Saudis. So when you have too many enemies and you have overstretched yourself and you have taken your own people for granted, you have not talked about social reform, and you have completely mismanaged the economy, then invariably someday this would have imploded, and that is what is happening. Now, whether it leads to a regime change or not, we don't know, because if the Americans think that I can bomb and people will support it, that may not be the case. Okay. A lot of people might be against the regime, but maybe equally against the Americans in Iran. Likewise, what can also happen, my last point, to divert the attention, it may also happen that the Iranians start bombing somebody else, because they also think there's a perception that a lot of what is happening inside Iran is being orchestrated from outside. So it's a subterfuge of various layers, but invariably, I think for far too long, people of Iran were taken for granted because you have huge inflation. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to sustain your family. That is where the problem is happening, and protests are happening, which are taking a dangerous turn. Back to you.
Right.